Hello, I am Seerath and today I'm here to discuss user ID tracking. Google Analytics do offer us cross-device tracking, but it needs a little help from our side. Now, why exactly do we need to set up user ID tracking? When Google Analytics track the user, it do so by creating a client ID for each user and storing it in a cookie in the user's browser. So Google Analytics is more sensitive towards a user browser than a user. So what does this mean is that if a particular user access the website from three different browsers, then Google Analytics will assign three different client IDs to the same user because the user is accessing the website from three different browsers. Now, sometimes this can work that, okay, a single user is counted as three, this can work. But in some situations, we want the accurate report. We do not want a single user to be counted multiple times. So for that, we need to enable user ID tracking. So user ID tracking does not destroy the client ID. The client ID stays in place, but all the client IDs are grouped under a single user ID. So after setting up the user ID, if the user now visits the website from different browsers, then the user will get associated to one user ID, right? Now we will see that how can we set it up. First of all, we need to go to analytics and here we go to tracking info. Then we have the option of user ID. If we will be setting it for the first time, it will ask us to accept some conditions and then we can create a user ID view. Now I have already created a view, so I'll not set it up again. I'll simply show it here. So I have two views here, all website data and the user ID view. In the user ID view, if I go to the view settings, I can see that here I have this option of user ID reports enabled, right? So they are enabled for us. Now, what do? I go to my website and let's click preview. Okay, so user ID is basically mostly something that the developer sends to us from the backend and it is stored in the data layer, right? So it is already present in the data layer and it is sent to us by the developer. In some cases, it can also be extracted from the URL. But as we are just doing the demo, I will extract the user ID value from the URL by simply just adding a parameter here, UID. I will extract it from here instead of going to the data layer because I do not have a user ID value inside here because that is not inputted from the backend. But in most cases, it will be, right? So now here we will be using the URL parameter. So let's go to Google Tag Manager. And we know that for extracting the value from the URL, we need to set up a variable. So let's go to our variables. And here, let's scroll down to user defined. And yeah, so I have created this variable. The configuration is of URL. The component type is query and query key is UID. So basically it is going to go to the URL and fetch UID for me, right? So I have named it as URL UID. I can also format it if I want to, but I don't want it here. So let's just leave it. Now, let's go to our Google Analytics variable. So this variable has the type of Google Analytics settings, right? We have already set up the tracking ID and all, but this time we need to set up the user ID. So what will we do? We will go to fields to set. If I show you, it will very simply show us the user ID. I have already selected it. That's why it's not in the list, but yeah. So it is already there waiting for us to give it a value. So we select user ID. Then for the variable, I have used URL UID that we just set up. The variable is fetching the value from the URL, right? Now, we will also want to create a custom dimension. The reason is that if we go to analytics, only this particular view is paying attention to this user ID right here. But for all the other views, we will have to create a custom dimension for them to take the user ID into consideration, right? So we scroll down and go to custom definitions and custom dimensions. So here, like we earlier created the affiliate ID and customer ID, we can simply create a new dimension, user ID, by clicking this button here and giving the name and the scope. I have already created this custom dimension here, which name is user ID, scope is user, and it's active. Now, if I see the index of this dimension is 3, the scope is user, and it was changed, and the status, right? Now, let's go back to Google Tag Manager and set this dimension up. In the custom index, I have inputted the index as 3, and I have selected the same variable here, right? URL UID. Now, all this is done. Let's hit save. Okay. Now, let's go to our preview mode and see that how are we receiving the user ID, right? So as we are not receiving it from the data layer, so we'll have to go here and input it manually. UID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go here and go to container loaded. Inside universal analytics tag. Yeah, so I am able to see the user ID in two places now. First, fields to set, user ID value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and another is the dimension 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we are able to fetch the value from the URL and store it here. Now, what do we want to use as a user ID is also a very crucial question. That answer should be very clear because sometimes businesses want to use the customer's email ID as the user ID or customer's name as a user ID. But as it is a personal information, we should be very, very careful like if we want to use a personal information as a user ID because it should not cause any security concerns. So if we go to our website again, and if we go to inspect, so here I have this GA debug on. So let's go to console and let's find out. It should be here. Just a second. Yeah, it's here. User ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and dimension 3 as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we know that it's working. Setting up a user ID is very easy. First, we go to analytics and we prepare our view there. Then we come back to Google Tag Manager, create a variable. So in this case, we are fetching the data from the URL. That's why we have, if we scroll down and see, then we have created the variable of type URL, right? But if we would want to fetch data from data layer, we will simply like select the data layer variable here and then do the process. So we create the variable and we applied it here because this is a global variable, right? The changes in this variable will be affected in all the others. So we have created here. Yeah. So this is how we can enable user ID in Google Tag Manager. Thank you.